Okay. So before I get started, can you just state your name and your occupation and everything?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Chloe Bomick. I'm about a year and a half almost out of grad school for my doctorate degree in clinical psychology, and I currently work as a clinical and police psychologist in Utah.
Okay. Um, so for your job, does like your day-to-day look like?
The day-to-day can vary based on what's on my calendar, and the calendar sort of goes in cycles from being pretty busy. December actually tends to be pretty busy for us to not as busy, but essentially I do two things. I do therapy. My boss and I were the only full-time employees. It's just two of us and some part-time people. And then we do most of the pre-employment evaluations for different police agencies in Utah. So I do some of those, like if someone wants to be a police officer, we do just personality and like mental health type testing, essentially, just to see how they would function in that role, what agencies could expect. So that probably is about 60% of my job, and therapy is 40.
Okay. Which part of it do you enjoy more?
Evaluations for sure. I actually am enjoying therapy more as I'm doing it. I had more evaluation experience in graduate school just because it's more of what I like and more of what I wanted to do in my career. But as I've gotten better, I've enjoyed therapy a little bit more than previously. And I also like working with the population I work with. It's just finding that good fit for me too. But definitely evaluations. It's like solving a puzzle. That's how I like to think of it. And just sort of seeing just different ways the puzzle goes together with the person that you're evaluating.
That's a good way to put it. Okay. What got you interested in this field or job to begin with?
So I fell into this job from happenstance. Actually, like I was saying earlier, I originally wanted to be a forensic neuropsychologist and work for a state hospital, just looking at different brain behavior relationships, maybe doing testing research on testing in terms of how it relates to criminal justice populations that have a lot of minorities and mental health issues. And the normative data just reflects mostly college age white males. Though there was more research being done in that area, and wanted to do evaluations like maybe competency to stand trial, insanity at time of the offense, those kind of things. And so I was moving towards a career in that. And then during my graduate training, I got sucked into working at the VA just to get my research experience. And I fell in love working with veterans. I worked with parolees for a year before that, and I found it a little bit too similar. So I was like, let me look at this here. And so I then wanted to work at criminal veterans in the criminal justice system and do research and clinical work in veterans courts, which are like federal courts trying to divert veterans from serving jail or prison sentences if they complete their treatment requirements, essentially. So I did a little bit of work in that. And then during my internship, which is how I moved to Utah to work at the VA there, I did a rotation for 3 months for my boss, sort of heard about police psychology, but didn't really have an exposure to it. And then absolutely fell in love with the work and just wanted to work with him in some way after I graduated. So I hit him up after graduation. He very graciously was able to give me a full-time job. So I've been there for about a year and a half now.
That's amazing. How was the move from the Bay to Salt Lake City?
It was an adjustment in some ways. In some ways, I definitely miss home for sure. But in other ways, I've been able to make it work. There is some cultural differences for sure. But otherwise, it's been better than I imagined. It's just finding the people that fit for me, just like anywhere.
That's pretty good. Which courses did you take in college that were like the most beneficial for what you're doing right now?
I think the major courses for sure, anything like abnormal psychology is always going to be useful. Anything involving research, like in terms of kind of research, in terms of how to conduct it, how to digest it, I think is really important, and writing. Like I said, I do a lot of evaluations, and the strength of my evaluations depends on my reports. So I have to be a good writer. My boss is very much a stick on that. He was a forensic psychologist for decades before doing what he does now. So he used to tear my stuff apart. Yeah, but it made me better. I think it really helped me accelerate my growth professionally. So I'm grateful he did that. But I think depending on the kind of psychology you want to do, if you're more on the evaluation and assessment side, writing is pretty essential.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
So you majored in psychology in college, correct?
Yes.
Nice. You went here to San Jose State,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I got my bachelor's, and
Like
then
San Jose State.
it was actually pretty good. I think part of me was nervous of getting into grad school, going to like a CSU type thing. But then once I started grad school, my first quarter, I was doing as well, if not better, than people that went to Ivy Leagues or like UCs. I was
Mhm.
like, I'm fine. So, like, if anything, in terms of grad school and like coursework and that sort of thing, I think SJSU will prepare you just fine.
Okay, great. Good to know. What are the key skills that like you need for to be successful at your job? I know you said you need to be really good at
Mhm.
writing, but what are some other things?
I think just being a good listener, being observant. And so it's just sort of being able to catch detail. The thing that I love the most about my job is that we don't deal with psychopathology, which is more severe diagnosable mental health, symptoms or syndromes. It's all about nuance in my job. So just kind of getting a sense of how someone makes you feel, sort of the little things and learning how to read those, I think is what makes me good at my job and developing those skills. And just sort of being comfortable being there with them. It just sort of, I think the more work you do in any kind of therapy or assessment, the less you're thrown off by things. And so sometimes people will just say the wackiest things, and learning how to have that poker face is also really helpful. I've had those in the last few weeks, especially.
That sounds like pretty fun. I don't know if it's just me, but every time I go out with my friends or something and they
Mhm.
ask me and people ask me what I major in and I tell them psychology, they're like, "Oh, so you go around just analyzing people." Did you ever get that?
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, you get people, you're reading my mind right now. I usually just tell people that they can't afford my hourly rate, and then they leave me alone. and then they and then they leave me alone. Unfortunately, I still get that. I always have. So I get you on that.
Yeah, definitely. But like aside from your job, like in just regular situations, like after learning psychology and learning how the mind works, do you find yourself like analyzing a situation a little more than you would normally?
Yes, I do. I definitely don't tell people that I do, just because I think people don't want to hear that. And also too, I want to be a person outside of work. So I like to turn off, so to speak. But I definitely do. There's some things you can't turn off. So I think it definitely has helped me be able to read situations, read people, especially with the job I do. I think it's that part's grown a lot in the last year, and just also how to make better decisions and be able to sort of intake the situation to make a more sound decision.
Okay, yeah. Because for me, it's always been like that too. I've always been an overthinker, but with psychology, the first thing I always tend to do is just like read the room that I'm in.
Mhm.
It's just the first thing I end up doing every time I walk into a room.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I think if anything, that makes you better in most situations. It's just sort of knowing when to hold cards to the chest versus be overt about what you're seeing and noticing.
Yeah, definitely. So, this field, the criminal psychology field, or
Mhm.
even the forensic psychology field, um, did you want to do it from like growing up? What like made you interested in it?
So I've been watching a lot of true crime since I was a kid, and I didn't think I'd be good at it. So I never thought of it. And then I was in my first year of college, and my dad's like, "You should check this out. You're always watching those damn shows." And so I started looking into it. And I'm like, "Oh, this is actually a pretty cool field." So I think ever since I started college is when I knew I wanted to do that type of work.
Yeah, I grew up watching true crimes.
Mhm.
The way I sleep is I listen to a crime podcast before I fall asleep. Like it's just how I've always been, and it's pretty interesting to me. So I'm like, I don't know, this field just seems interesting. So I did my research, and here I am talking to you about it now.
Absolutely.
That was really, really interesting to me, like just getting to know everything about you and your job. I just want to say thank you so much for keeping up with the messages and everything and
Yeah,
actually
of
being
course.
able to sit down with me. I
Yeah.
learned a lot. I'm definitely going to do a lot more research in this field and see exactly what I want to do.
And there's so many options that I never considered. And I guess sort of my unsolicited advice to you is just keeping your mind open, you never know the kind of inner, what will come up in your path. I feel like my path has been sort of windy turvy, even though I had very clear idea of what I wanted to do. And I didn't end up that way, but I'm very happy with where I ended up. And when it comes to criminal justice, especially the stuff you're seeing on the media and a lot of reforms that are being made and need to be made, quite frankly, I think you're going to see a lot more mental health played out in the field, whether it's working with the police departments and doing more de-escalation and mental health interference for people who need it. You're seeing a lot more of research and consideration in the court system of trauma and sort of how trauma impacts, the commission of offenses, if that kind of defers responsibility, sort of like veterans courts, right? It's the thing is if you have because they're a veteran, maybe what they've been through helps mitigate some of their responsibility in some crimes. Or even just the idea of testing and making sure that we have more accurate ways of assessing risk for offense, insanity at the time of the crime, being able to stand trial, those kind of things. So there's a lot of options and a lot of growth. And forensic neuropsychology, from what I know, is the fastest growing subfield of clinical psychology, in existence. So I think that's a very much burgeoning area as well.
Oh, okay. So right now I'm in my first semester, but after break, I'm going to be in my second semester of college. When do you think I should because I've always been confused on this, when do I start dipping my toes in the field and looking for internships or whenever?
I would say as soon as realistic for you, just because the higher you get in your education, the less grades matter and the more experiences matter. So for me, I use my grades to get into grad school because I went straight from my bachelor's into my PhD program, which in psychology, you can do that, by the way. You don't need a master's unless that's where you want to end up. But if you want to do, I guess, more of the fun work that you're interested in, more of the evaluations, you do need a doctorate for evaluations. If you want to do more of counseling and program development, a master's will be fine. It just depends on what it is you want to do. But so I use my grades to help me again. I had a little bit of research, but I didn't really have anything clinical until I started. But I think that having some kind of, if you had to choose between getting a job versus getting a master's and you want a doctorate eventually, I would choose the job and the internships because the experience, I think, is more valuable in some ways, as long as you have good grades for undergrad.
Oh, okay.
So as soon as realistically as possible, and I think you can be creative with your experiences and internships too, as long as you know how to spin it into your professional story, so to speak.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for meeting up with me today.
Of course.
I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully we could keep in touch. And if I ever have any questions, I know who to go to. Again, thank you so much for this. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Hit me up anytime you need anything. And I wish you the best of luck.
Definitely. Thank you so much. You
Thank
too.
you.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.